Have you ever felt like you deeply knew someone, only to discover that they were hiding secrets that could change everything? Sometimes, life places us in front of impossible choices, where the heart and reason are in constant conflict. Clara believed she had found love in Daniel, but what seemed like a fairy tale turned out to be a dangerous game of secrets and lies. Their love was tested by unimaginable circumstances, and each revelation seemed darker than the last. But is it possible to keep loving someone when trust is shaken? Or worse, when your own safety is at stake? This isn't just any romance, it's a story about whether love can survive or not amidst extreme challenges. Get ready to dive into Clara and Daniel's dilemmas. What is stronger, love or the truth? How far would you go to protect the one you love, even if it meant facing dangers you never imagined? It was an ordinary day, one of those that drag on unhurriedly, but for Clara, the weight of the world felt heavier than ever. In a tucked-away cafe in the heart of the city, the aroma of coffee and fresh bread almost drowned out her tangled thoughts. When Daniel walked in, it was as if the room shifted in tone. His captivating smile and effortless demeanor had a magnetic quality, something Clara couldn't ignore. Without meaning to, she dropped her bag, scattering its contents everywhere. And, of course, he was the first to kneel and help. As they gathered coins and papers, Clara and Daniel's eyes met. It was a simple moment, but heavy with meaning, as if the universe had conspired for that precise instant. Daniel was charming in a way that felt natural, and Clara felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't experienced in ages. "Do you believe in coincidences?" he asked with a crooked smile. And in that moment, Clara, usually so skeptical, found herself wondering if life might hold more surprises than she had imagined. Their conversation flowed like a calm river, effortlessly, as though they were old friends. Clara, usually so reserved, found herself sharing stories of her childhood and long-forgotten dreams, while Daniel listened with genuine interest. He had a peculiar gift for making silence feel comfortable, almost therapeutic. Anyone watching from the cafe might have said they looked like the perfect pair, and who could blame them? Daniel seemed to know just what to say to calm Clara's inner storm. As he spoke of travels and tales, he dropped subtle hints of mystery that only fueled her curiosity. Paris has its hidden beauties, but it's in the alleyways that the soul of the city lives, he said, leaving Clara wondering how many secrets this man carried. She tried to ignore the blush creeping to her face, but the fascination was inevitable. In a world moving so fast, where human connections felt increasingly superficial, their meeting held a certain magic. Clara felt safe, yet challenged at the same time. It wasn't just Daniel's good looks, it was the way he made time slow down. It was as if every word, every gesture, had been designed to make sense. But despite the enchantment, Clara felt a faint unease, a sensation she couldn't quite explain. The encounter ended with a casual invitation from Daniel. "Maybe one day you can show me your favorite spots around here?" he suggested, as if tossing a stone into a calm lake, waiting for the ripples. Clara hesitated for a moment before responding with a shy smile. Maybe. Yet, deep down, something told her this wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning. As Daniel disappeared through the door, Clara stood staring as if trying to capture something fleeting. There was a mix of familiarity and mystery about him, and it intrigued her more than she cared to admit. What she didn't know was that this seemingly simple meeting would be the first thread of a much more intricate web. The sense of something bigger hung in the air, leaving Clara with the strange feeling that her life was about to change in an irreversible way. Clara and Daniel quickly became inseparable, as if life had decided to push them together without asking for permission. They explored the city hand in hand, wandering through hidden cafes and old bookstores where Daniel always managed to find a book that seemed to carry some hidden meaning. "This one is perfect for you," he'd say, never quite explaining why. Clara, still captivated, began to sense that something about him didn't entirely fit, a hidden layer beneath the charm. Despite their intense connection, Clara started noticing things that didn't add up. Daniel was often absent, offering excuses that felt too improvised to be believable. He spoke of business but was never specific. Clara tried to push her doubts aside. After all, no one is perfect. Still, She couldn't ignore the fact that he always returned from his trips with a larger suitcase than he had taken and stories that never seemed to have clear endings. There were moments when Daniel seemed lost in thought, as though he were in another world. During one dinner, Clara caught him staring into space, his face heavy with an unspoken weight. "Are you okay?" she asked, but his response came with a practiced smile. "Of course, just thinking about how funny life can be." It was the kind of answer that said nothing, but Clara knew there was something he wasn't sharing. Clara's feelings began to waver between fascination and doubt. Every gesture of affection from Daniel was genuine, yet there was a subtle tension in his demeanor, as if he were holding back from revealing too much. During one of his trips, Clara found herself replaying the small details he had let slip, names of cities, muddled timelines, minor contradictions that, when pieced together, began to form an unsettling picture. "I trust you," Clara said once, as though issuing a subtle challenge. Daniel met her gaze for a moment that lasted too long before replying, "You can trust me." His voice was firm, but something in his expression left Clara on edge. She wanted to believe that love could fill the gaps between them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was an unseen chasm growing wider. One evening, while they were preparing a simple dinner together, Daniel casually mentioned an upcoming trip. Trying to appear nonchalant, though her voice quivered slightly, Clara asked, "Why do you travel so much?" He laughed, deflecting, "Maybe I'm running from something." It was a joke, but Clara felt the weight behind his words. What if he really was running? What if she had fallen for someone who wasn't who he claimed to be? The trips, the strange behaviors, the silences, they all seemed to conspire to deepen Clara's doubts. And yet she couldn't bring herself to pull away. The mystery drew her in as much as it terrified her, and the more she tried to piece things together, the more she realized she was only scratching the surface. Deep down, she knew that to uncover the truth, she would have to dig deeper, and that this truth might be far darker than she could imagine. Clara didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but the feeling that something was off grew stronger with each passing day. One morning, while Daniel was away on one of his trips, curiosity finally overcame hesitation. She began exploring his apartment, trying to convince herself that she only wanted to understand the man she was falling for. That's when, upon moving a seemingly innocuous painting in the living room, her eyes landed on something unexpected, a small door embedded in the wall. The safe was hidden in an almost amateurish way, as if Daniel never expected anyone to find it. Clara ran her fingers over the cold metal surface, her heart racing. This wasn't the kind of secret you expect to find in the home of someone you love. She tried to tell herself to stop, but her mind was already swirling with a storm of questions. What was he hiding? Why didn't he trust her enough to share it? Without knowing the combination, Clara sat down beside the safe, trying to organize her thoughts. Looking around, she noticed that certain objects in the apartment felt out of place, as if they didn't belong to the life Daniel had shown her. An old photograph of a group of unfamiliar people, crumpled papers in the trash, even a map with markings on different cities, all of it began to form a puzzle Clara wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Clara's imagination ran wild as she tried to guess what might be inside the safe. Money? Fake documents? Something darker? Each possibility seemed more absurd than the last, but none could be ruled out. She thought about confronting Daniel but knew that doing so would mean admitting she had invaded his privacy. It was a dilemma between trust and the desperate need to understand who he truly was. As she continued to reflect, Clara recalled fragments of their conversations. Daniel mentioning the things we can't control, or casually saying once, "Some secrets are better kept locked away." At the time, those words sounded poetic, but now they seemed to hint at something deeper. Each piece of the puzzle made Clara feel as though she knew less about the man she was falling for. She tried to ignore the safe, but it was impossible. Over the next few days, the image of that small metal door consumed her thoughts. Clara even began searching online for tutorials on how to open safes, a mix of guilt and determination weighing on her shoulders. At the same time, she tried to act as though nothing was wrong when Daniel called. "Everything okay over there?" he'd ask, and she'd reply with practiced enthusiasm, "Of course. How about you?" The discovery of the safe didn't answer Clara's questions. If anything, it only amplified them. The object seemed to carry the weight of all of Daniel's secrets, a silent guardian between them. As she waited for his return, Clara knew that locked door wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of the invisible wall growing between them, and she had to decide if she was ready to face whatever lay on the other side. The silence of the night had always been a refuge for Clara, but that night, it felt heavier, loaded with something she couldn't name. Daniel had returned from his latest trip, but there was something strange about his behavior, a nervousness he tried to mask. When he left in a hurry, saying he had something important to take care of, Clara decided to do something she never imagined: follow him. Her heart raced as she walked through the dark streets, trying not to be seen. The pursuit led her to a warehouse in the city's industrial district. Clara had never been there before, but the sense of danger was palpable. The place seemed abandoned, with broken windows and graffiti on the walls, but the main door was slightly ajar. Carefully, she entered, feeling the cold, heavy air of the space. From a distance, she spotted Daniel in a tense conversation with two men who exuded authority. She hid behind a stack of boxes, straining to listen. "You know we don't have time for mistakes, Daniel," one of the men said, his voice low but filled with menace. Daniel responded firmly, but there was a tension in his tone Clara had never heard before. The words were vague but clear enough to reveal that Daniel was involved in something much bigger, something dangerous. Clara covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a gasp. Every sentence she overheard felt like another piece of a puzzle she had never wanted to solve. Then it happened. A careless movement made Clara knock over a can, the noise echoing through the silent warehouse. Daniel turned immediately, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Clara could see the shock on his face, but there was something else too: guilt. He gestured for the men to wait and began walking toward her, his footsteps pounding in her ears like a hammer. "What are you doing here?" Daniel's voice was low, almost a whisper, but laced with an authority Clara didn't recognize. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was point at him, as if that could explain her presence. He sighed, running a hand through his hair before uttering the words that would change everything. "You shouldn't have come, Clara. Now things are going to get even more complicated." Daniel led her out of the warehouse, his face a mixture of anger and concern. Outside, he finally explained, not everything, but enough to shatter any illusion Clara still had. He was a spy, working in clandestine operations that involved constant risks and secrets capable of endangering lives. Clara could barely process his words, feeling as if her world were crumbling. "I wanted to protect you from this," he said, but his excuses felt weak against the weight of his revelation. Daniel's words echoed in Clara's mind as they left the site. She didn't know what was worse, the fact that he had lied to her, or the reality that her life was now entangled in something so dangerous. The warehouse faded into the background, but its shadow seemed to follow her, carrying a new question. Was she willing to face the risks of staying by Daniel's side? Clara had never felt as vulnerable as she did that night. Daniel, once the man who brought her safety and warmth, now felt like a stranger. The revelation of his secret life had left an open wound in her heart, but she knew she needed to hear his explanation. Sitting across from each other in the small apartment, he began to speak. "I never wanted to lie to you," he said, his voice steady but burdened. "But my job doesn't allow me to be transparent." Daniel's words felt like both a confession and a defense. He explained how his life as a spy forced him to wear a mask for everyone around him, even Clara. "You were different," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I wanted something real, but I was afraid you wouldn't accept who I am." Each sentence was another blow to Clara's heart, as she wrestled with the question of how love could survive amidst so many lies. But Clara wasn't the type to accept excuses easily. "Do you think that's fair?" she asked, her voice thick with pain and indignation. "I gave you my trust, Daniel, and you used it against me." He tried to defend himself, claiming he had only been trying to protect her, but that only deepened her frustration. Clara didn't want protection, she wanted honesty. But how could she demand that from someone whose very life depended on secrecy? Their confrontation felt like an endless game of questions and answers that led nowhere. Daniel revealed fragments of his life, But Clara knew there was still so much he was keeping from her. "You don't understand the danger behind all of this," he said, his voice almost pleading. But how could Clara understand? Until that moment, her world had been one of simple certainties. Now, it felt as though she had been thrust into a spy thriller, playing the unwilling lead. Despite the conflict, there was one thing Clara couldn't deny: she still loved Daniel. But that love now felt tainted, riddled with cracks she wasn't sure could ever be mended. She wanted to believe he could change, that they could overcome this together. Yet, deep down, she also knew that love alone might not be enough to face the dangers that now loomed over them. Uncertainty was a slow poison, eating away at her hopes. As silence settled between them, Daniel reached out to touch her hand. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, with a sincerity Clara wasn't sure she could trust. She looked at him, searching his eyes for the answer to the burning question in her mind. Was he truly the man she had fallen in love with, or just a shadow crafted from lies and secrets? The doubt hung between them like an invisible barrier. Clara knew that, as painful as it was, their story wasn't over yet. With every word exchanged, every emotion laid bare, the game between them grew more intricate. Love and distrust twisted together into a nearly unbreakable knot. And as dawn broke, casting a faint light on what felt like an endless tunnel, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The next morning brought more than doubt. It brought action. Clara and Daniel had barely exchanged a few words when a sharp, piercing sound shattered the quiet. The crash of broken glass and the whistle of something flying close by were enough to make Clara realize they were under attack. Daniel, with reflexes she had never seen before, grabbed her arm and pulled her down, shielding her as he assessed the situation. "Stay here," he said, but Clara knew blindly obeying wasn't an option. Before she could argue, Daniel was already in motion, checking every corner of the apartment with a precision that was almost mechanical. His expression had changed, focused, calculated, almost cold. To Clara, it was another reminder that this man had depths she could never fully comprehend. Every second stretched into an eternity as she heard footsteps approaching outside. When the intruders finally entered, the air seemed to grow heavier. Daniel confronted the two men with astonishing skill, disarming one with swift, precise movements. But this wasn't a movie. Clara was in the middle of the chaos, feeling every rapid beat of her heart. In a brief moment of distraction, one of the attackers turned his attention to her, and panic surged through her. Daniel acted quickly, but the tension of real danger and their proximity was suffocating. With the intruders temporarily incapacitated, Daniel grabbed Clara's hand and led her out of the apartment. They descended the fire escape, avoiding any obvious routes. Clara struggled to keep up with the frantic pace, a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline coursing through her. There was no time for questions, only action. "Where are we going?" she finally managed to ask. "Somewhere safe," he replied, but his voice carried no reassurance. The streets were eerily empty as they ran, weaving through alleys and shortcuts Daniel seemed to know too well. Every step was a reminder that Clara's quiet, predictable life was over. She couldn't help but think, how had it come to this? How had someone she loved brought so much chaos and danger into her world? Yet, deep down, there was a part of her that couldn't deny it. Being with Daniel, even in the chaos, was addictive. At last, they reached an improvised hideout, a deserted building that seemed to have been used for situations like this before. Daniel began setting up barriers and checking the perimeter, while Clara tried to catch her breath. "You need to trust me now more than ever," he said, his eyes locked on hers. But trusting him felt impossible after so many lies. She wondered, was this trust an act of faith or a fatal mistake? Clara knew this escape was only the beginning. The attack wasn't an isolated event but part of something much larger, something she was only beginning to grasp. As silence settled over the hideout, Clara realized that no matter how much she wanted to escape this reality, she had no choice. She was trapped in this world of secrets and danger, and what came next would depend as much on her courage as on Daniel's ability to keep them alive. The day began with a tension so heavy it seemed to weigh down the very air. Clara had managed a few hours of sleep but was jolted awake by a distant noise she couldn't identify. Daniel was on the phone, his voice low and urgent. "They found us," he said, not even glancing at her. Before she could fully process what that meant, she felt firm hands gripping her, not Daniel's hands. The kidnapping happened swiftly, almost choreographed. Clara was taken to a dark warehouse where the only light came from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The surrounding darkness seemed to swallow everything, but Clara refused to give in to fear. The kidnappers' voices were a mix of threats and muted laughter, and Daniel's name was mentioned repeatedly. She knew she was being used as bait, but that knowledge didn't ease the terror of being there, vulnerable and alone. While Clara tried to steady herself, Daniel was preparing for the rescue. He had faced danger before, but this time it was different. This wasn't just a mission, it was Clara. His plan was daring and fraught with risks, but there was no alternative. Every second wasted put her life in greater jeopardy. Armed with more determination than resources, Daniel made his way to the warehouse, his heart weighed down by the guilt of having brought her into this chaos. When Daniel stormed the warehouse, everything happened in a whirlwind of sound and movement. Clara heard the shouts before she saw him, feeling a simultaneous wave of relief and fear. He was there, but now he was in danger too. The kidnappers reacted quickly, and the ensuing confrontation was like a chaotic dance between life and death. Clara, still bound, watched everything unfold with a mix of hope and despair. In a critical moment, one of the kidnappers grabbed Clara, using her as a shield and pressing a gun to her head. "One more step and she's dead," he threatened. Daniel froze, his eyes locking onto Clara's, searching for strength in hers. That's when she realized something. Even amidst the chaos, trust still lingered between them. She whispered softly, "You know what to do." It was a signal. Despite everything, she still believed in him. With a swift, calculated move, Daniel disarmed the kidnapper and pulled Clara into his arms, shielding her as he neutralized the final threat. The warehouse fell silent, save for the sound of their labored breaths. For the first time in hours, Clara felt like she could breathe again. But the danger wasn't entirely gone. This was only another chapter in a story that seemed endless. Later, as they recovered, Daniel asked, "Do you trust me, Clara?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with both tears and determination. "I don't know if I can trust who you are," she said, "but I trust what I feel for you." The choice was made. Clara knew her life would never be the same, but for now, she was willing to face the unknown, by his side. Love isn't always simple. In fact, it's often a minefield of tough choices, unexpected secrets, and life-changing decisions. Clara and Daniel's story teaches us that, even amidst chaos, it's possible to find strength in vulnerability and courage in the most frightening situations. But the real question is, what would you do if you were in their place? Would you face the dangers for love? Forgive lies to save a connection? Or choose to protect your own peace above all else? Think about it. Sometimes, the answers aren't clear, but these questions are what help us grow and discover what truly matters. If this story touched you in any way, why not share your thoughts? Leave a comment and tell us your experience. Have you ever faced something similar? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we have many more stories to tell and lessons to share. Who knows, the next chapter might bring more answers, or even new questions.